life found a way. This is the No Fear Cast. We know what scares you. I'm Matt.
And I'm Mel. And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. We always try to do a looser summer theme, and to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Jurassic Park film, we're doing a Summer of Crichton. We're kicking it off by looking at the movie itself. Welcome to Jurassic Park. Okay, listeners, so I am going to start us off here with our discussion. I'm going to give just a little bit of background about the original Jurassic Park. We're talking the first Jurassic Park film that came out in 1993. It was based on the Michael Crichton book, which came out, I believe, in 1990. I believe Matt and I both have prior experiences with this film, as I'm sure you do too, listeners. I for sure watched the first Jurassic Park film. I haven't really kept up with the following Jurassic Park films, but that first one definitely, it was fun rewatching it. And like I said in the intro, it's the 30th anniversary of it, which is kind of hard to believe. Before I get into a little bit of the background and some of the stats on the movie, I just want to say I'm sure you could tell from the intro that Lisa was not able to join us this time. So, Lisa, we miss having you here, and we're looking forward to being able to get our schedules to work for next time. So, the movie Jurassic Park had a $63 million budget, and it ended up grossing over $1.1 billion worldwide. It was an extremely successful movie. It was directed by Steven Spielberg, and the screenplay was initially written by Michael Crichton, and then David, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, Kep did some final work on the script. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, it was based on Michael Crichton's novel, Jurassic Park. It was produced by Kathleen Kennedy and Gerald R. Mullen. And I'm sure listeners, you could tell from the discussion that Matt and I had about arachnophobia that we have some similar stats happening here too, with the involvement of Steven Spielberg and Kathleen Kennedy, and those people. And the movie had many stars. I'm going to name just a few of them. So you have Sam Neill and Laura Dern, of course, kind of headlining with Jeff Goldblum. Richard Attenborough plays the industrialist, which I had actually forgotten that. And then you also have folks like B.D. Wong, Bob Peck, and Samuel L. Jackson was in this movie as well. And I think that's probably all the background that I want to give on it. We'll probably talk a little bit about this, but the special effects were kind of a mix of, I guess we would say, like CGI and practical effects. My experience with this movie, I am like 99.9% sure I watched it in the theater. I've watched Jurassic Park many, many times. After I'd seen it in the theater, I know it was a rental, and I'm pretty sure we had a copy of it. I can't remember if it was an actual DVD or if it was like even a VHS. I feel like it was probably a DVD, and I watched it many times. I don't know how many times, but it's a movie that I'm relatively familiar with. Now, it had been years since I watched it last. So, as I said earlier, watching it again was a real treat. I remember enjoying it the first time I watched it. As a child, even younger than when I first saw the movie, I went through, as every kid does, a dinosaur period in my life where I was reading like every book I could get from the public and the school library about dinosaurs. So seeing this movie with dinosaurs in it was really cool. And as a kid and even as an adult, I love the kind of trope, I guess you would say, or maybe that's not the right word. The idea of making it like a adventure park, almost like a theme park ride with dinosaurs. I could totally see someone trying to do that if there was a way to bring dinosaurs back. I love the characters. Yeah, Sam Neill, Laura Dern, and Jeff Goldblum are great. Laura Dern's character in particular is just really fun. There's humor in the movie. Of course, you have the grandchildren of the Richard Attenborough character, so there's that kind of fear of what's going to happen to the children. Matt, I really enjoy this movie, and I'm glad that I think you were the one who suggested we do a type of Michael Crichton summer and start with Jurassic Park, and I think that this is really perfect.
Well, first of all, you're welcome. I think I was the one that tossed it out, but I mean, you and Lisa did also, sign off on the idea while we were spitballing possible summer ideas. And the really ironic thing of it is that at the time I was not aware that this is the 30th anniversary of the film. I didn't find that out until after we had kind of settled on this. So I thought that was just kind of funny. Like I just wasn't even thinking. If you had asked me before, I would have said, "Oh, it came out in like 92, 93." I don't know exactly which. So I think that's kind of fortuitous there. But like you said, Mel, I do have prior history with this movie. I I definitely saw it in the theaters. I remember my parents taking me to it, our whole family kind of thing. And I'm pretty sure that if I didn't make them stop at the bookstore, because the theater that we saw it in was in the mall, a child of the 80s and 90s that I was, either I made them stop at the bookstore in the mall on the before we went home, or like we went the next day and I got a copy of the book. That's how much I liked the movie. And I think a lot of other people probably did similarly because we like you said, the movie. I mean, it was the number one film of all time until Titanic came a few years later. So, I mean, it was a huge, humongous hit. I loved it as a 12-year-old when I saw it. Like lots of kids, I had gone through a dinosaur phase. I had kind of, I guess, grown out of the phase where I was obsessed with dinosaurs. That's when I was younger, but I mean, I still, as an adult in my middle age, um, I still think dinosaurs are fascinating and really interesting. And I have to say, some of that may end up going back to this movie as much as it does me being 5 or 6 years old and being obsessed with dinosaurs too. I mean, I I don't know what else I have to add as far as other impressions. I just remember, I mean, like I wanted to be Dr. Grant for like a good couple of months after watching this movie. I wanted to go be a paleontologist, and and not like how Indiana Jones makes you want to be an archaeologist until you realize what archaeology really is. Like I knew that it was more like the beginning scene where they're digging in the dirt and brushing bones off with soft brushes to preserve them. But I mean, there's a part of me, maybe in an alternate universe, that did actually go into that, because I would love that. I find that time period of when dinosaurs were on the planet just fascinating, just in terms of there are a huge number of species of not just animals but plants as well that existed for millions of years before humans ever even existed. And I don't know, I just find that really cool. Initial impressions too of watching this movie now in 2023 as a middle-aged adult. I would say one thing that really surprised me is how well the special effects do hold up. I mean, there it was, cutting edge for 1993, the computer graphics that they used, and a lot of it really does hold up 30 years later. There's a few scenes. I mean, I might say that the first scene where they encounter dinosaurs. I believe it was Dr. Grant and Dr. Sattler. They see a Brachiosaurus. That one may have been kind of the worst to age amongst them all, but even still, like I was watching it on an HD TV, which no one had plans for this movie to be shown on 30 years ago, and it looked pretty decent. So kudos to the entire special effects team. Just saying that right now, like you guys did a great job for something to hold up this long. And I think too, if I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but I have always been of the persuasion that CGI is good and all, but it works best when it's married with practical effects. And I think the best examples of that would be the Star Wars prequels alongside the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which were both releasing at about the same time. And the Lord of the Rings just looks so much better because they incorporated practical effects with the CGI. And I think that's one of the reasons why this held up so well for Jurassic Park. I mean, the scene with the Triceratops, that was not Sam Neill just laying on a table pretending he was on a dinosaur. That was a practical effect. So, um, anyway, I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. I've got all sorts of soapboxes I can get on about overusage of CGI and all that sort of thing. But yeah, that's kind of my initial impressions. Mel, do you kind of want to run down the characters or kind of run through the plot? What were you thinking in terms of tackling the movie?
Oh man. Well, I mean, we could kind of run through the plot like we did with arachnophobia. I mean, we wouldn't have to get too nitty gritty about it, but just the basic kind of movements. Do you want to kind of kick us off in that?
Oh, sure, I can. And that's actually the very first note that I took while watching this was about the opening scene and how it scared the crap out of me when I was 12 years old watching this in the theater. It's that iconic scene of them bringing the raptor cage to Jurassic Park. You've got Muldoon, the I don't know what you call him. I can't remember his job title, but he's sort of the game warden slash big game hunter stereotype. But you don't see the raptor. All you see is the cage, and it's shaking and rattling. And then one of the workers gets dragged in, and you hear him screaming as he's killed off camera, basically. And that's actually kind of a good segue into something that I wanted to mention. I mean, first of all, very effective opening scene, gets you right from the start, hooks you in, and it really was a great example of something that I didn't realize until I was actually looking at a review after watching this of Jurassic Park 30 years later. One of the things that they mention is that the dinosaurs themselves are only on screen for about 14 minutes of the runtime. And this scene, like this opening scene, starts off with that. You don't actually see the velociraptor. You see the cage, you see the flashlight from the worker being shaken around. I mean, you have all of these like intimations of danger without ever showing you the monster. And I know that that's something that Spielberg did on Jaws out of almost necessity because of the problems that they had with the mechanical shark. But I think it was a good lesson, and I think it plays out really well here. There are a number of scenes, especially with the raptors, because you don't really see the raptors in the flesh until well into the third act of the movie. And just this like ominous sense of foreboding that they bring up, especially as you hear Dr. Grant describing how they hunt in packs, but um, they're smart enough to have two sneak up from sides because you're paying attention to the one that's visible, and he shows you the slashing hook nail that they have in their claw that is like 6 inches long and could split you open. I mean, it's you hear all these horror stories, you see all of these boogeyman type things without ever actually seeing the raptors, and I thought that was really effective. I thought that worked really well throughout the whole movie. I mean, even with the Tyrannosaurus scenes, there's a whole lot more buildup and menace before you ever see the T Rex. And well, I mean, what do you think about that, Mel? Do you think that worked, or
Yeah, I do. And I thought about that a little bit watching the movie this time around, but I still when I was looking at that article that we found, looking at it 30 years later, I was kind of shocked when I saw them note that the dinosaurs were only visible in about 14 minutes of the movie. I mean, this is a movie that's slightly over 2 hours, right? So yeah, I mean it's really impressive. And it was funny because I kind of paused and I was like, no way, they had to be in longer than 14 minutes. But when I went back and thought about it, it's like you said, there's so many moments when you feel like you're seeing the dinosaur, but you're really not. You're just seeing like moving branches or something, or you're being directed to where the dinosaur is supposed to be by people looking. Or one of the things that I thought was effective humor wise is when they go on their first trip, like they're guests going through the park, and none of the animals are where they can view them. You know, it's like when you go to the zoo and none of the animals are are out, or they're in a different part of their enclosure and you can't see them, and so they're like super frustrated because they came all this way, and so you see their enclosures and maybe what they eat, but you're not getting, you know, the dinosaur itself. And yeah, I feel like it's effective on a few different levels. One is that you have someone like me who, when they found out the dinosaurs were only in it for 14 minutes, was shocked because I felt like they were in it much longer because of the fact that I was being tricked into thinking that I'm like seeing them. But also the fact that, just like you said, it builds the tension, like ended up happening with Jaws, because your imagination of what could be happening and the tension over thinking these people might be in danger is built up to the point that there is a real payoff when you see the dinosaurs. And I agree with you too that not seeing them as much may help with the special effects thing, though, that the special effects hold up. You know, the herd of dinosaurs that they see at one point. I mean, you know, obviously, you know, it's a special effect, but there's also something kind of majestic to, you know, paleontologists seeing this for the first time. The T-Rex seems believable to me. I love the fact that this Triceratops was a kind of robot, so there was that physical interaction that you can see. I agree. Like when the kids were supposed to be feeding and petting the Brachiosaurus, I think at one point the head almost looked like it wasn't quite in like the frame with them. But I mean, I can forgive those things. The movie's 30 years old, and you know, special effects are always going to be hitting a boundary at some point. But I think, you know, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I don't know if I want to revisit Jurassic Park, it's older, I've got new ones to watch that have better special effects, I think it's worth checking it out because, again, kind of like we talked about with arachnophobia, there's something to be said for withholding or like making these gestures to make you anticipate what's happening. One more thing before I toss it back to you, Matt. I know Lisa had dropped in our doc this conversation that you kind of summarized earlier about how velociraptors would hunt. And I think that was also an effective way to build tension because in the very beginning they're doing their paleontological thing, and I agree. I totally agree with you. I thought that paleontology would be awesome. And even as a middle aged person now watching it, I'm like, maybe I should have chosen that route. But they're doing the dig. It's very much like, you know, not we're not in a sci-fi movie yet. And the kid comes like a volunteer, I guess, or someone's child, and he's basically saying he doesn't think that these velociraptors are that intimidating. And in one scene, you have the humor of the fact that Dr. Alan Grant doesn't really like kids and the explanation of what the velociraptors are like to make us anticipate and have that tension. And so he describes to the kid everything that you were saying, Matt, and then drags this claw like over the kid's body in the places where the velociraptor would attack. And so it's funny, but also kind of disturbing to do this to a child. But I think it works in all those ways that some of the humor worked in arachnophobia to get us anticipating things that would happen later. And then of course you have the game warden from Kenya or whatever, Muldoon, explain how the raptors do that there in the park and how it causes problems. And the raptors attacking someone is the reason why the scientists are there for insurance purposes. So again, you know, we've watched some movies for this podcast in the past that had big holes and didn't quite hold together. This is not one of those movies. I feel like it pays off as you go through everything that you're given at the beginning. But yeah, I agree with you, Matt, that the ways that they set up attention without actually showing us the dinosaurs are great. And I guess too, I mean, you know, you mentioned earlier talking about the characters, it allows for a lot of character development that I think you initially wouldn't think you would get in a movie like this.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that's one of the big, like, one of the good things about this movie. I mean, this is a tentpole summer blockbuster kind of movie. I mean, it's not an action movie as we think of them now in 2023, which tends to be more, comic book superhero based or, Bruce Willis Die Hard sort of thing. But I mean, this was a big it was a summer blockbuster type movie, but I mean, all of the characters feel fairly well developed. You've already mentioned Dr. Grant and his he doesn't like kids, and I mean, it's not a major like it's not his thing, but it's a thing about him. He doesn't really like kids. He doesn't know how to interact with them. As you said, it's very not well, I guess subtly shown in that scene that you were we were just talking about. But then you've also got Dr. Sattler. I mean, just from the way she carries herself, the things she says. I mean, got she's a strong female character. She clearly shows that she has almost a dare say a feminist sort of vibe. I don't know the right word for it. Without without hitting you over the head with the character type that she has. Same with Jeff Goldblum as Dr. Malcolm. He's kind of the sarcastic mathematician, and he's used a lot for the to kind of break the tension. But in the end, the point that he's making turns out to be right. The hubris of man to think that man can control nature is, um, kind of the central theme of this movie. And I mean, all these characters, and even the grandkids, the Hammond, the park builder, they all, I mean, they all feel like fleshed out characters. You can see Hammond justifying to himself that this park is not something that that it's a scientific marvel and that alone, and it's not an obsession that he has chased. But the more you watch it and you realize, like, just through little bits of dialogue, like they mentioned during the tour that there's an issue with the headlights on the cars, and Samuel L. Jackson's character says something about how this is like number 115, or I don't remember the number, but it was over 100 of bugs on the bug list for the day. Like, they're obviously like rushing this into production because of hubris. And to go back to where I started with that, Jeff Goldblum is kind of the voice of reason, even if he is fairly sarcastic and also a little like smooth talking, trying to hit on uh, Dr. Sattler. And he's used in a great way to break tension. And I was going to jump back too to mention what you had said earlier about how great it is that they have the intro to Jurassic Park. They go through these gigantic gates with Jurassic Park, and it's this great build up. These the scientists going to see dinosaurs in Jurassic Park for the first time, and then there's nothing. And then they get to the next cage, and then there's nothing. And I loved that. I thought that was a great sort of move on their part too, to kind of nod toward, like you said, like going to a zoo, to the point where Jeff Goldblum even like goes up to the camera and one of the cameras and says something like, there are going to be dinosaurs in your dinosaur park, right? I always I always loved Ian Malcolm, the character, because of his kind of, for lack of a better word, smartassery. Like, I always liked that about him. He was always kind of sarcastic and funny without being overly obnoxious. And so I feel like I've kind of wandered all around the points I've been making here, but I mean that was one of my notes about that I had was Jeff Goldblum as a rock star mathematician, which that whole idea alone is already kind of a contradiction in and of itself. But you know, he plays it. He plays it well. And anyway, I mean, I guess you know we see that play out throughout this movie. The hubris of not just Hammond, but all of the people involved in it. Uh, Nedry, the guy who's double crossing them and going to sell the embryos to Hammond's competitor, his hubris ends up coming in that he doesn't really assume that the dinosaur that he ends up in the vicinity of is going to be extremely poisonous and hungry. So, yeah, well, do you have anything to add there, Mel?
No, man, I completely agree with what you're saying there. I do think that hubris is a big theme in this movie, or at least, in various ways. Like I feel too, is it Nedry? I think his name is the guy that betrays them. He has financial issues and is feels slighted by. There's some sort of conflict going on between him and our guy that is running this park, Hammond. And so he decides he's going to betray him, like you said, by going to his rival industrialist, I guess you would say. I'm not sure if we're ever told what Hammond does when he's not making dinosaur parks, but to give them the information they need to compete with him. And yeah, he plans out this entire thing. He thinks he's a great hacker. It's a 90s movie. You got to have a hacker, and they're just pounding on keyboards. And he thinks he's so good that he won't, he'll be able to get out with this and not get caught, and he doesn't care about anybody else either. So I mean, there's a crassness to him, even though you can feel sorry for him that he feels like he needs this for his maybe financial situation. He definitely thinks that he's like too good for everybody, I guess you would say, at the park, and that his plan will work. But he doesn't factor in the idea that there's going to be a tropical storm. I think at one point he realized, I can't remember the specific situation, but like while he's trying to escape, he gets turned around. He has to change his plan slightly because something that he assumed would happen with his hacking program that he set up didn't work out. And so yeah, I mean, he, like, just like you said, because he doesn't know anything about the dinosaurs, he thinks he can handle the one he runs into, and ends up being killed. So he starts out as a supremely confident character who thinks he can do this and ruin Hammond. And what actually ruins Hammond in a way is, like you said, the hubris of his ideas. I think that scene where they're having lunch and the old time kind of slide projector is running slides around them about the park, and the scientists go from being like kids in a candy store and this is amazing to what's the responsibility here of creation. The whole time they were talking, I was like, this is the kernel of the movie. It's, yes, it's watching a T-Rex like eat a dude, sitting in a toilet, I guess. And yes, it's all the kind of excitement and the tension, but there's also the question of whether this should ever be done. And even though I don't know that it's like possible for this to happen in real life, I'm not saying that. I'm saying if it was possible for it to happen in real life, I could totally see. I think in 2023, we could still totally see a person with a ton of money being like, I don't need to question if it's okay to clone dinosaurs and bring them back and make a park. I'm just going to make the money, as the insurance lawyer starts saying in that conversation. He originally thought it was going to be a problem and starts arguing for it because of money. Just like Nedry needs money, Hammond wants to make money, the insurance company and whatever wants to make money. So I think they do a really good job of not beating you over the head with the idea, but showing that, like, you know, a long, long time ago, these creatures went extinct. And so we didn't have to deal with each other. And so to be like, we have the technology to make us all be on Earth again at the same time, it's like, you have no idea what that's going to do and the chaos that can ensue. Because the article said, I think, that controlling a T-Rex turns out to be as easy as controlling a hurricane. And I mean, that's appropriate because they can't control the tropical storm that screws up their electricity and messes up everything. They weren't, like you said, they had so many bugs, they'd never practiced all this stuff before. They were working it out as they go super fast. So they can't even survive a tropical storm, which is something they'll have happen to them a lot. They can't survive this disgruntled employee like changing things on them. And they certainly can't, like, there's no way a bunch of people with like tasers or prods or something can control a T-Rex. And you see that, like you said, from the very beginning with the accident with the employees. So yeah, I love that too, that kind of idea that Hammond doesn't think he's being prideful, but he kind of is. And he even puts his grandchildren in danger, even though you can tell he loves them. He puts them in danger because this park is just so important to him. I mean, when he's eating the ice cream and his grandchildren are actually out there on their own in the park, God knows what's happened to them on his end. Dr. Sattler has to basically say to him, like, stop thinking about how to make the park work. Like, it's over now. We have to figure out how to survive. And I think that's an important part of the movie, is like people kind of getting obsessed with something and having to be pulled out of that to understand kind of what's going on. And yeah, I love Jeff Goldblum's character. Like, he is on the verge of becoming annoying at times, but as the movie goes on, I like him more and more. And he's very entertaining. And I agree with you about Laura Dern's character too. I mean, she is a scientist in her own right, with her own expertise that is at the level of the other two scientists, and gets put on display a couple times in the movie, where she does know answers to situations that's going on, which is way different from when you're watching, like, I guess we think of now like more um, classic movies or classic sci-fi films in this vein, where the women would be more of more support characters, I guess. And I really enjoyed seeing that too. She was one of my favorite characters when I first saw it, and she still is.
I think she's great, and the fact that the fact that she's willing to go elbow deep into a pile of dinosaur dung, at the drop of a hat. Um, but yeah, I mean, she's, like you said, she's a strong character who is equally knowledgeable as the other experts, just in her field. I mean, she's a paleobotanist, but she is absolutely shown as an expert. She never really falls prey to a damsel in distress sort of thing. There's nothing like that. I mean, she is just a character, and a strong character, and that's it's like a breath of fresh air to see that, especially in a summer popcorn flick kind of thing. Um, I did actually make some notes as I was watching this on some of the comments that they make about the hubris, and one of them, and this is kind of a paraphrase, but uh, Jeff Goldblum says that the genetic force is one of the most powerful things in the world, and you're wielding it like a kid who's found his dad's gun. And I thought that was a really good kind of summation of the whole thing, as well as the more succinct that you were so preoccupied with if they could, that your scientists didn't stop to think if they should. Very famous kind of quote there. But then also I had one um, from Dr. Sattler where she says that they pointing out that they don't know anything about extinct ecosystems, and that in the room that they're sitting in, this is while they were having dinner before the tour, or maybe lunch it was before the tour, that they have species of plants in the room that are poisonous, but they picked them obviously because they looked good. And I think that quote in particular also has a little bit of foreshadowing, because it's hinted at that, I mean, that's what's making the Triceratops sick, that there were these, uh, I don't remember, some sort of lilacs or something that, she notices, and the like staff doctor is like, oh yeah, we know they're poisonous, but the animals don't eat them. And she's like, well, we need to see their droppings. And that's when she immediately goes for the droppings. But yeah, just I don't know. I don't want to start beating the dead horse, but there's so many great encapsulations without beating you over the head with the fact that, I mean, Hammond is he's out of his league. He and his scientists and the whole crew think that they can control a natural force, an animal or animals that have been, like you said, extinct for millions of years, never interacted with humans, never experienced something like captivity, and something that we only know about from their fossil record, which, even at that time in the 90s, it was for it to be the main thing that Dr. Grant says, that the animal, or that the dinosaurs evolved into birds over time. I mean, even Timmy, the grandkid, points out that he's like, well, there's other paleontologists, because he's that 12-year-old kid that's super into paleontology. He's like, well, this guy thinks that it was a meteor that caused them to go extinct, and then this guy thinks it was this, but none of them say that they turned into birds. I mean, that was still pretty debated 30 years ago. Paleontology has come a long way since then, and it's kind of validated perspective, but at the time, I mean, even that was not common, like commonly agreed upon. And so, like we're kind of fumbling around in the dark, like putting a flashlight through a keyhole when it comes to looking at these species. We've got their bones, you know, or maybe if they were fossilized in amber or something like that. But I mean, how do you know exactly how a velociraptor hunts? And I'm not saying this to ding Dr. Grant, but I'm saying it to ding Hammond. You bring the species back to life without properly considering all the things you don't know and asking the big question of what don't we know about this animal? Oh, we found its embryo. We added some amphibian DNA. Boom, we've got a live velociraptor. Well, turns out they're really, really, really smart. you know, I don't know. I don't know. I'm kind of rambling here, but
No, yeah, I just want to jump in here real quick and kind of interact with that. I've thought about that too during the movie because I mean I'm not a scientist, but these dinosaurs are just clones, right? I mean they took genetic material, not even complete genetic material, they say, and that's how they're getting these dinosaurs. And you're totally right. I mean, not only are you limited by going off a fossil record as to what they could look like or whatever, now, if you use genetic material, you might be able to figure out physically what they could have looked like. But I just wonder, like, is a velociraptor who's been reconstructed from partially degraded DNA with amphibian DNA added into it, and been around humans since it was a child, because Hammond says they try to make sure a human is around them when they're babies at all times. It didn't seem to help per se, but like that Tyrannosaurus, those velociraptors are not going to be like the ones from millions of years ago. I wouldn't think. It's a different climate. It's a different location. It's different plants around them. Like you were mentioning, they're not paying attention to that. So I mean, I think there's a limit to what they could even learn from the clones, because everything has been tainted or slightly changed by human intervention, which would not have happened in the original situation when they were on Earth, which is also part of that hubris and the downfall, because it's the tampering that they do to make sure it works that means that the dinosaurs genetic behaviors and proclivities can change and mutate.
absolutely, I think that's an excellent point. And even to draw a finer point to it, or maybe just fully expand on something you were kind of hinting at, that with that mutating with the DNA, like they have no idea what the repercussions of adding amphibian DNA to dinosaurs could be. We have no idea what it would be like to add it to the genome of something that's living, because I don't think that that's ever been actually done. What would happen if you added uh, amphibian DNA to a lizard's DNA that was missing pieces? We don't know. And this movie and Ian Malcolm would say, well, just because you can doesn't mean you should try to find out. Just because we have this technology, that may not be a good idea. You might end up with Godzilla or something. But yeah, I mean, there's so many unknowns that they just aren't anticipating. And I mean, overall, that's the downfall of the park and of Hammond. I mean, that's what leads to the power going out, is they're not accounting for security. They have all of security basically in the hands of one person, the Nedry character, who's the hacker guy. I mean, he's not in charge of security, but he's the programmer who has access to all the systems, and there's no fail safes there. So when he starts his, I don't know what you want to call it, virus, bug, whatever, so that he can go try to make his $1 million, when things start going offline, that's an unpredicted outcome. And I'm not saying that they should have predicted that Nedry was going to write a bug that was going to shut down the things, but I think they should have had much better fail safes in place for what happens if the power grid goes down. What happens if we're not able to keep the fences electrified? I mean, there didn't seem to be any fail safes. the power to the fences goes down, and next thing you know, the T-Rex is throwing the Ford Explorer across the road. I mean, it's pretty quick how it breaks out and starts wreaking havoc, and the other dinosaurs as well. So I don't know. I mean, not that you can account for every eventuality, but what happens if the electrified fences goes down is probably a pretty common question that I think most people would ask. And you know, having some sort of fail-safe in place and multiple fail-safes, multiple redundancies even, but I digress. Um, I kind of wanted to use that to kind of segue us into the last half, like the second half of the movie, the dinosaurs running amok, basically, because I mean that's what we came for, right? That's the bread and butter of this movie, and I mean, man, it still doesn't disappoint. I was watching that scene where like the power goes out and they're sitting in the cars right outside the T-Rex enclosure, right outside the T-Rex enclosure, and they do that iconic scene of the gigantic booming footstep, and you could see the water in the glass kind of rippling from it. I mean, that stuff still holds up. I mean, I know it was kind of lampooned to death on places like Saturday Night Live and those sorts of things at the time, but I mean, as an idea in a movie for a great way to show that the T-Rex is coming, what better way than to have a gigantic booming footstep and to see that rippling in a glass of water? Like that's iconic and holds up great. I thought the whole scene with the T-Rex still looks great, plays great. I mean, the tension of the kids being in the car in front of them and the lawyer running out to go hide in the bathroom and leaving them alone while you've got uh, Jeff Goldblum and Sam Neill in the car behind them. Like all of that. I mean, so well done. Just so well done. And really from there through the end of the movie, just all of the action, the tension, the Sam Neill coming to begrudgingly care about the children that have ended up in his care. I mean, this is all it's all handled really well. I really like it. I think they did a great job with all of that.
I agree. I love the kind of booming when they know the Tyrannosaurus is coming. As a Godzilla fan, it reminded me of kind of a Godzilla technique, but I think it kind of hold well, a pun on your glass of water. I think it holds water because, if a Tyrannosaurus Rex was around, it would be huge, and you probably would hear it coming. And like you said, it's just a good effect because it happens again when. Dr. Sattler and the Muldoon are investigating what happened and find Malcolm injured. And the Tyrannosaurus comes back again, and you kind of understand he's coming back because of, or understand she's coming back because of the booming and the water moving and the footprint that time. I agree with you that the Tyrannosaurus Rex parts are good. And yeah, I mean, I think the second half of the movie, I totally agree with you. There were a couple things I thought were fascinating about it. One was, like I mentioned, in arachnophobia. We're now in movies that, unlike Anaconda and Lake Placid, have clocks on them, and they're as close to that as they can be in a movie. The tension keeps you paying attention. You're not confused as to why the people are in different places or doing the things that they're doing. They take the time to throw out like little explanations of what's going on. So I thought that was really tight. And then, yeah, I mean, it's just the dinosaur action. It's everybody dealing with the dinosaur and either not making it, as a lot of people don't, or hopefully surviving, as a few of the people do. One of the things I thought was most fascinating with that, I think all of those scenes are great in their own way, but when Dr. Sattler is trying to get the power back on and the velociraptors are in there and she finds Samuel L. Jackson's character, well, part of him, and you realize what happened to him, that's so effective and so creepy. again with the darkness and the light and the flashing lights and the fact that she's alone and terrified at this point. I totally understood why she was having this traumatic reaction when she got back to, just focusing on running and stopping or whatever she needed to do to survive. That's definitely a memorable scene for me for the first time I saw the movie too. But the second thing that I thought was interesting about the second half of the movie is that the dinosaurs, like, now that the technology is gone, the dinosaurs are just being dinosaurs. And this island is truly becoming Jurassic Park, not because of this guy's hubris and his wanting to make a park for people to see. The Tyrannosaurus Rex is, remember Dr. Grant says towards the beginning that the Tyrannosaurus Rex doesn't want people to bring it goats, it wants to hunt. And it's hunting. It's in the herd of dinosaurs chasing them and eating one. It's trying to get the velociraptors at the end. And the velociraptors are now hunting. Like, if you think of zoos do a lot of important conservation work, but at the same time their animals are in enclosures, they're not in their wild habitats, and they often do habits or form different behaviors that are trying to compensate for maybe anxiety or issues that they have because they're not in their natural habitat anymore. And so we go from the zoo vibe to all hell breaking loose because they're literally going back to when man wasn't a part of this. Man is not watching them anymore or controlling them at all. The dinosaurs are just being dinosaurs. And the way that as the second half progresses, the dinosaurs slowly take over different parts of the park, I thought was just really effective for the scariness factor, but also just, this guy tried something very hubristic and prideful, and it's all being destroyed. Like, the humans are just barely going to survive this.
Well, first of all, I agree about the scene showing what's left of Samuel L. Jackson. That was one of the scenes that stuck in my memory from my first viewing because it's haunting, it's scary, and I mean you see the blood without it being overly gory. So I mean it can still get that PG-13 rating, but still be just enough for you to go, whoa. I mean, that's very effective. And I like your point about the real Jurassic Park being what happens after the fences goes down and after all the chaos starts to unleash, because not just I mean, I would say I mean, spot on with what Dr. Grant said about the T-Rex wanting to hunt and seeing him hunting in the pack of dinosaurs. But to add to that, I mean, none of these animals were built to like live segregated from each other. You know, they all interacted with each other. It was an ecosystem. And actually, I would argue, I don't have the paleontology knowledge right now, but I would be pretty sure that a good number of these species did not even exist at the same time as each other. So, to go back to our things you didn't plan for, you know, I think Triceratops and T Rex may have been at very different epochs in uh, history. But anyway, the point is that they weren't T-Rex over here, Brachiosaurus over here, Triceratops over here. I mean, they were all together interacting together, and that's that's what we see at the end. That the plant eaters are, some of them are getting eaten by the predators, and but not all of them, and others are. I mean, I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm just agreeing with you that like this is the real Jurassic Park. All of these together, commingling and eating each other, because it's. I mean that's what nature is. It's not pretty, and it can't be controlled. It can't be tamed, and can't always even be predicted. I will say, I'm glad that the people that survive did survive. I I wish more had. I loved Samuel L. Jackson's character as the. We didn't talk about him a whole lot, but the chain smoking computer expert who trying to undo all the stuff that Nedry did. Um, Loved his character. Um, and Muldoon, I liked Muldoon as well, especially like I thought his the way that he went out with that iconic line of "clever girl," where the Raptors have snuck up on him almost exactly the way that Dr. Grant described at the beginning of the movie. So, but I mean, I wish he had made it as well. But alas, with a movie like this, we do have to have our casualties.
Muldoon was so respectful of the animals too. Like he really wanted to learn about them and he accepted their behavior for what it was.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, he was not some tyrannical zookeeper who's just like throw them in cages. He's like, and especially with the raptors, like you said, it was clear that he respected them, and especially he respected their intelligence. Like when he's describing them after the feeding at the enclosure in the beginning of the movie, I mean, it's almost with reverence where he's like, you know. They were testing the fences. They were never hitting the same place twice. They were looking for weaknesses. Like he knows what he's up against here, and probably even knows that he's kind of tasked with an ultimately impossible job because, I mean, yes, he's tasked with keeping them contained, but I think he knows on some level that something's going to happen. I mean, especially with the Raptors, they're too smart. And even though he respects them, not all of the people, including Hammond, respect them the way that they should. But yeah, I mean, he was a good character. He was not some. Yeah, it could have been easy to play him as somebody that was, just out to like be in charge over the dinosaurs or something like that. But actually, I mean, I thought he was a good character. But alas, he was one of the ones that fell.
I think they do a really good job in the movie of making all the characters at least have motivations that you can understand. And Nedry obviously comes off as the villain, but you're right. I mean, some of these characters could have been written in real kind of types, and that you kind of connect with them, and that's good because you want to have compassion for your characters. You want to care about them, like you said. You want some of them to make it out. All right, Matt, I know we're nearing the end of our discussion now. Do you have any thoughts about, I mean, we've kind of talked about the end. I mean, the Tyrannosaurus and the Velociraptors go after the children. That's also an iconic scene that I've remembered from the first time I watched it, in the kitchen. And then the Raptors and the Tyrannosaurus like end up destroying the visitor center, which again was very appropriate. Do you have any comments about that end before our survivors make it out?
Well, just what you said. I mean, the Velociraptors terrorizing the kids is another iconic scene, especially them hiding in the kitchen and trying not to make noise and moving around, trying not to get seen or heard by them. I mean, that's just, I mean, that's one of the iconic scenes of this movie. That and the Tyrannosaurus foot drop, footsteps in water, and all of that. Um, I guess my only other final thought would be, don't watch the sequels. Just don't. If you like the movie or if you like yourself, don't watch them, no matter how curious you are. Now, I will leave out the more recent Jurassic World sequels. I actually have not seen a single one of them. I've heard that they tend to be more action movie fare and not quite at the level of this one, but I can't speak to that personally. But I have seen the two immediate sequels, The Lost World and Jurassic Park 3, and they're just not the same. And even, I mean, Crichton himself even wrote a sequel to the book and he called it The Lost World. And I mean, I don't believe I've read the book. If I do, I don't remember it, which is probably pretty telling, but I'm pretty certain I haven't actually read the book. But I mean, most reviewers even said, it's not the same. It's not as good as the original book, the first one. The sequels are not as good as the first movie. I may get some hate for that from some of you listeners if you do like these sequels. And I'm not saying they're awful, but really they just don't live up to the magic that this movie has. And some of that magic is in the acting, and some of it's in the writing, and some of it's in the directing. I mean, it all just came together perfectly. And one thing that I think worked so well was watching these scientists, watching their wonder as they see these animals that they've studied their whole lives in the flesh for the first time. I mean, that's just something about that. I mean, that is like Steven Spielberg to a T. I mean, he nails that, and it just doesn't quite live up in the sequels. But anyway, I'll stop trashing the sequels. That's kind of my final thought there, and I guess a good sort of segue into if any of you do have any thoughts about the sequels that you would like to take me to task on, and if you do like The Lost World, we'd love to hear from you. And even if you agree with me, we'd love to hear from you as well. So we're at No Fearcast on Twitter and Instagram, and we also have a Facebook page. Our email is at nofearcast@gmail.com. If you love what we're doing, you can consider supporting us on Patreon. Well, we've paused new episodes for the time being, but we do have 6 seasons worth of mini episodes, which if you've never supported us and have never listened to them, there's quite a bit of access there, that back catalog to go through. And we totally understand if that's not something that's possible right now, so you can always just rate and review us on whatever medium you're using to listen to this podcast, which is entirely free, and it helps other listeners find us. Theme music by Nicholas Gasparini, and we will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.